Hi, everyone. This is Pastor John Olson, Minister of Vocations with the Northwestern Minnesota Synod. Thank you for tuning in to our workshop today for this 2021 Synod Assembly. During this workshop, we're looking at ways that you might consider encouraging others to think about serving as a rostered leader in our church, serving as a minister of Word and Sacrament as a pastor, or serving as a minister of Word and Service as a deacon. In our time together, we're going to look at ways that we might encourage people to think about serving in the church in these different ways. We're going to have the opportunity to look at what one congregation does, Calvary Lutheran Church in Bemidji, Minnesota. They've got some creative ways that they have encouraged others, especially young people, to think about serving as a rostered leader. We'll also be talking with two of our candidates for rostered service and be introducing them just a bit later. Two of our candidates who are well in the process of candidacy as they continue to discern their call to serve as leaders in our church. I want to thank you for tuning in today. You may want to stop the video after listening to the folks at Calvary and Bemidji. If you're with a group of people, you could stop the video and discuss things that you've heard. Or you could just continue on as we talk with the two candidates as well. That will be your decision. At the end of the video, I want to share just a couple of resources that are available. If you are considering rostered service, or if you know of someone who is considering rostered service, we have a couple of good resources available on the ELCA website. I'd like to share those with you. For now, let's look at what one congregation does. Calvary Lutheran in Bemidji, Minnesota, with Pastor Janelle Netland. They have some creative ways that they continue to lift up and recognize in others gifts for service in the church. Let's take a look.
Calvary Lutheran Church in Bemidji takes seriously planting seeds of faith to foster rostered leaders in the ELCA. It starts in the water of baptism when we celebrate as a community God's gifts given to each individual we baptize. The days of preschool, we have conversations about imagining them being future pastors of the church. What would you like best of being a pastor?
I like to pray.
Praying with people. Ooh, I love that one.
Talking about God.
Talking about God and Jesus. I like that one.
I like doing stuff that I want to do.
Yeah, I like doing stuff I like to do too. And being a pastor, you get to do lots of different things, right? Yeah.
I can just do a one-handed cartwheel.
A one-handed cartwheel. Do them all the time.
I drive in a car.
Okay, your favorite part of being a pastor would be driving in a car. Is it a nice car?
Mine's a nice car to talk to God, drive.
Right. Gotta have a nice car to drive to talk to other people about God. That's right. Singing. Yeah, pastors get to sing sometimes in church too. That's fun. So let's end with the word of prayer, okay? Let's fold our hands and pray. God, thank you for pastors. Amen.
Amen.
In third grade, we give parents Bibles that they pass on to their youth with highlighted verses from family and friends to nurture them in faith. In confirmation, the final test in 8th grade has a question about what role you would play serving in God's church. And then an exit interview with one of the pastors explores some of the choices that they made. We also, in confirmation rehearsal, nominate people from the class who could do the job of the pastor. Hearing peers nominate one another is really affirming. The 8th graders are also asked to do a capstone event of writing a statement of faith. This is a time where they can envision being in a community of faith and leading, expressing their faith through scripture, story, and I believe statements. Well, hi everyone. I'm Pastor Jeanette Netland, one of the pastors at Calvary Lutheran Church, and this is my good friend Logan Rubel. He is an 8th grade confirmation student here, and Logan and I have known each other for a lot of years, but as he is about ready to be confirmed and be an active member of this church and vote for a raise for me at the next annual meeting, right, Logan?
Right.
Right. We're just going to have a conversation about how his faith is leading him to potentially think about being a pastor someday. So, Logan, tell me a little bit about what excites you about your faith in Jesus.
Okay, Jesus always is like drawing me to do better things, and he's always motivating me to, be a better person and do better things.
Yeah, and you've had Bible camp,
Yep.
VBS, Sunday school.
Yeah, so I went to a Bible camp, and that was like really fun. I met a lot of new friends and did a lot of fun activities with a lot of people, and yeah, that was really fun.
Good. A great way to grow in your faith.
Yeah.
Plus, you're in church all the time. I mean,
Yeah.
Poor guy, you don't get to step in before and be like, hey, Logan, would you acolyte with me? Can you help with the offering? And you're super willing to do that. Tell me about how supportive your family is about being in church.
Okay, so my family is like always coming to church. We were like one of the first families here, and we're like one of the last to leave. So yeah, we love coming to church, and it always like brings the whole family together, and then we usually go to breakfast after.
Right.
Yeah. So.
Good. Now, your family does foster care for other kids, and what has that taught you about how Jesus sees us as a family?
So it taught me that Jesus is like open to everybody and not certain people. He lets everybody in and not just, those who are always worshiping him all the time. And
Right.
yeah.
He has a wide embrace, and again, the blood of our bodies isn't what Jesus thinks about. It's the blood of Jesus that unites us as God's family, which is so cool, because I know communion is one of the coolest things we get to do at church.
Yeah.
It's kind of a snack before breakfast.
Yeah.
Right? Okay, so thinking about being a pastor someday, what excites you about doing my job?
So one thing that would that draws me into being a pastor is like everybody is always so like tuned into
Yes.
like pastors, and they're always saying how much they love the pastors and always how like good sermons are and everything. And I thought that would be really fun to do, is talk sermons and all that stuff.
Yeah, and your statement of faith is coming up, and you'll have a chance to kind of
Yeah.
express your faith using scripture and I believe statements. Are you looking forward to that?
Yes, I really am. I am really excited to do that and show people what my statement of faith will be. So
Awesome.
Yeah.
Good. Well, you know my slogan. You've heard it for many, many years, and this is what I say to many students, but especially students like Logan. If I can do it, so can you. Finally, the high school seniors are asked to compose another statement of faith in the spring of their senior year to share again with our worshiping community. Lastly, Calvary is an internship site for the seminary students who are needing a placement. Our congregation enjoys having a student come and learning for a year along with them as they grow to be public leaders of God's church.
Welcome back. I'd like to say a word of thanks again to Pastor Jeanette Netland and our friends at Calvary Lutheran Church in Bemidji for all the ways that they encourage and support others to think about rostered leadership. We really enjoyed that video. Thank you so much. Well, in the next portion of our time together, we have the opportunity to visit with two candidates for rostered service in our Northwestern Minnesota Synod. And we're going to hear how they were encouraged in their journey. In a moment, we're going to visit with candidate Jeanette Perrault. But first, we have the joy of chatting with candidate Devlin Brooks. Devlin is a student at Luther Seminary. He lives in Moorhead, Minnesota. And Devlin, thankfully, is on the tail end of the candidacy process. Devlin, welcome.
Thanks, John. Appreciate it.
Good to have you with us today. And Devlin, maybe you want to say a little bit more about yourself. I gave you a very brief introduction. Do you want to share just a little bit more about yourself?
Love to. Yeah, so I am married to my wife, Shelley. This is a second marriage for both of us. We've been together now 9 years. We have 4 kids together, 2 boys, 2 girls. We kind of were the Brady Bunch. I was a single dad with 2 boys. She was a single mom with 2 girls. And we knew each other way back in college 20 years ago, and then just reconnected in our adult lives. And and found a second marriage that has been just God-given for both of us and our families. And so I'm very grateful for that. Our oldest now lives in the Twin Cities and is a nurse on the front lines, working in a COVID agency where he does vaccinations. So we're really proud of him. And then we got another one graduating this May and two more in high school here in Moorhead. So
It sounds like a busy household, Devlin.
we are.
Yes. And Devlin, I'm not sure, did you mention that you also, in addition to being a candidate, you are serving a church and you also have a full-time job?
I do, yeah. So my first profession was in journalism, and the last 26 years after graduating from Bemidji State, ironically enough, I've been in newspapers all over Minnesota, and so I have worked full-time all the way through seminary, all 5 years. In addition, 3 years ago, the assistant bishop here in our synod actually came forward and said there was a church just to the south of us in Moorhead here in Wolverton, Minnesota, about 20 miles out. That they were looking for a bridge. They needed their full-time, long-term full-time pastor was retiring, and they kind of needed somebody as an interim. And so I went out, I met with them, and just really enjoyed the folks that were on the council. And I served there as a SAM, a synodically authorized minister, for 18 months before I started interning there. And so I have now been at the church for 3.5 years of this process. So it's been, talk about a gift to be able to do the seminary and practical application in two parallel paths. And it's been a gift to me. I just have to say that it's been a blessing.
Fantastic. And I know you've been a gift to that congregation, Devlin. So thank you for your service. Well, Devlin, you know why we're here today. We're talking about, in this workshop, we're talking about ways that we might encourage others to consider leadership in the church, rostered leadership, becoming a pastor, becoming a deacon. And I thought it would be interesting to chat with a couple of our actual candidates to find out, in what ways were you encouraged and supported as you began discerning the call to rostered leadership?
Well, I actually just got chills. So I think I'm a really good candidate for this specific question, because I really do attribute my call story to the actions of 3 pastors, and it's really truly directly correlated to me ending up to where I am. So as a young man, just about fresh out of college, I actually took an editor's job up in International Falls. It would have been, just a couple of years out of school. And during my first marriage, we moved up there. We had 2 young boys, one a newborn and one that was 4 years old. And there was some financial pressures. We had just moved into the community. Our family was struggling with some mental health issues. And there was a pastor in International Falls at the time who stepped in and provided just some amazing pastoral care to our family over the course of 6 months or so. And I remembered at that time, this would have been 20 plus years ago, after that experience, thinking, wow, that is really something that I would like to do for someone someday. And so there was kind of this inkling then of some movement towards going to seminary. I made a conscious decision at the time that it wasn't the time for my family. We were kind of already on a precipice anyway, and we had enough going on. And so I just said, it's just not the time. And I buried it, right? As so many of us walked away from it. And really, it just kind of just never gave it another thought. And as you know, your kids get older and you work because the kids are getting older and there's a mortgage payment, right? And it just, you get stuck in this professional track, um, and so I moved on. But fast forward 15 years, and I ended up here in Moorhead in 2007. I, at the time, was single, and I had the custody of my two boys. And so I was a single dad in a new town, coming off a really hard divorce on all of us. And it was a really dark place in my life, my kids' lives. And I had the fortunate circumstances of moving in two blocks down from Christ the King Lutheran Church here in Moorhead.
Yes.
And I love this part of the story. So I'm here in Moorhead. I have no social connections. I have no family in town. I have two young boys. They would have been about 3 and 8 about that time. And I'm like, my 4th grader is really struggling. And I knew I needed to give him, well, I'm driving along, taking the corner, and right in the front yard of Christ the King is a placard for Boy Scouts. Boy Scouts meet here on Tuesday nights, right? And so I'm like, okay, well, there's a connecting point for my 4th grader. I can get him a social network. And so we started going there on Tuesday nights for scouts, and the kids would go off to their scouts, and I would sit in the hallway and read a book. And well, this would go on. This went on for several weeks, and over the course of weeks, at the time, of course, John, you know this, it was staffed by a husband and wife pastor team, Matt and Kathy Vallon, who were, much loved at that church. And over the course of time, they just started stopping in to visit with me in the hallway, asking what I was doing there, and getting to know me, and getting to, asking about the kids. And eventually there was an invitation to come to Wednesday night services that really fit well into our schedule because of the family situation. And so we did, and we started coming to Wednesday night services. And then I was there for a couple of years, and Kathy said, well, why don't you guys become members? And we became members. And then not long after that, Pastor Matt stopped me one night and he said, hey, we got an adult opening for a mission trip coming this summer, a week-long trip to Green Bay, and our youth director could use a hand. Would you like to go? And it was square in that age group where my older son would have been going with, and I volunteered. And I came back from that mission trip, John, and it was just, it was like that shell cracking open and that seed growing. Not long after, I found myself on church council, and then I found myself doing stepping in on certain Wednesday nights when none of the pastors were available, and I would host service. And just ironically, yesterday marked the 8-year anniversary from the first sermon I gave. And
Nice. I knew Christ the King was going to come in to this story at some point, so it's fun to hear that.
And so at one point, so now we've been at the church 3 or 4 years. I'm now serving as the, on the council. I was kind of assistant youth director, so to speak. And soon enough, Matt started with his prodding of, you're doing all the work of being a pastor anyway. Why don't you become a pastor? As Matt has that, as he has the habit of doing. And so it started blossoming, and it started, the idea of, well, maybe I really could do this, right? And John, I had never ever shared this story with Shelley, who, why would I, right? Something that happened 20 years ago. And so anyway, there was this faith formation, there was this leadership formation, and really truly over the course of 5 to 6 years, Matt and Kathy invested so much time in helping to heal a very broken man, financially, spiritually, health-wise. They invested so much of themselves in me. And then there was just the catalyst moment, right? And I just love to tell this story because at the time, Shelley was working at Lutheran Campus Ministries at MSUM here in Moorhead. And as you know, John, every fall they hosted a luncheon for the representatives from the 6 seminaries. And so she, that day, was in her office at LCM. I was in my office here at the forum, and she texted me and joked, "Hey, the representatives from the seminaries are here for lunch. Why don't you come over?" And at that moment, I texted her back and I said, "You don't know this, but," and I shared the story with her. And there was this really pregnant pause in the conversation, and she texted back and she said, "Well, then you better come for lunch." And so I did. I left work. I drove across town, went to lunch, and at the time I met Jill Apple from Luther.
Yeah.
And 6 years later, this is where we're at, right? Sorry. But to your point earlier, pastors make a difference, and the investment that you make in the lives of your congregants are the best recruiting tool that we have, because I wouldn't be here today if it weren't for those 3 pastors that have invested in me and made me whole first. They helped me heal first, and now that's the gift that I want to be able to give back.
Nice. Thank you, Devlin. I appreciate hearing so much about your call story and some of those who provided the encouragement. They were put in the right place at the right time. And not only the 2 pastors, but your wife, Shelley, who made that phone call and said, "Come on over." Whether it was half-hearted or not, she didn't know how the Spirit was working and nudging you in this direction. So
years later, I don't know if she makes that call. Just
yes,
she's very grateful for our journey together. So
yeah. Well, Devlin, I really appreciate it. It reminds us to really watch for those opportunities, the people who are sort of hanging around in the hallways of the church, and to have some conversation, extend an invitation, say, "Come on in," and invitation to get deeper into ministry with a youth trip, being an adult on a youth trip, or inviting a youth onto a trip. And then extending invitations for leadership with worship and church council, those kinds of things, and how the Spirit continues to work in all those invitations and calling us, and the discernment that goes on then as the years go on. So great story, Devlin. Fun to hear it. I've known you for a few years, but I have not known kind of the extent of your call story, and I appreciate hearing about some of these important people and important events.
Yeah.
Appreciate it, Devlin. Well, we need to close because we're going to visit with Jeanette Perrault as well and hear her story. But I want to thank you, Devlin. Really appreciate your time today and for your willingness to open up to us and to be vulnerable and share your life and your call story. So thank you so much. Appreciate it. And God's blessings to you as you continue to wind your way down through the candidacy process and have your approval interview in June.
Thanks, John. I'm honored.
Thank you. I'd like to say a word of welcome to Jeanette Perrault, who is joining us this morning. Jeanette is one of our candidates in Northwestern Minnesota Synod. And Jeanette is a student at Wartburg, and she's fortunate enough to be on internship in Florida right now. So you're joining us from sunny Florida, Jeanette, and we extend a warm Minnesota welcome to you. Good to have you here this morning. Jeanette, let's start. Could you tell us a little bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Like Pastor John said, my name is Jeanette Perrault. I grew up in the Twin Cities, a suburb north of St. Paul, Minneapolis, which is Lino Lakes, Minnesota. I grew up in the church, ELCA. It was a cradle Lutheran, you call us. And I did kind of all the church things that kids do. And when I was 18, I decided that I needed to do something different, move away a little bit farther from where I grew up. So I went to Concordia in Moorhead, where I kind of just flourished and started to kind of figure out what I felt called to do a little bit. However, I got a business management degree and a minor in psychology. So seminary wasn't quite on the table yet for me, but it's always in the back of my mind. So I went to school at Concordia in Moorhead, obviously. And I stayed in the Fargo-Moorhead for about 5 years after I worked at the YMCA for a year. And then I actually went back to Concordia and worked in the events department there. And I loved it so much, but it wasn't a career. It was something that I got to do. And things in my outside life started to filter in. I was teaching yoga, but it was a faith practice yoga. I was going to Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd, and we started a young adult ministry there. There was a large women's gathering that was held once a year that I began as well in the Fargo-Moorhead area. And seminary started to just kind of push into me a little bit. And through some encouragement from people, I looked into Luther Seminary and Wartburg Seminary. And in the summer of 2018, I had quit working at Concordia. I left Moorhead, moved myself completely to Dubuque, Iowa, where I now attend Wartburg Seminary. And like Pastor John said, I'm in my third year of school. I'm in Bradenton, Florida right now on my internship year, which will end in June. And then I will go back for one more year of schooling in Dubuque. So that's a little bit about my journey and where I'm at right now.
Fantastic. Well, we're glad that God pushed you a bit, Jeanette, to consider being a pastor, being a rostered leader, and we look forward to the day that we welcome you back into Northwestern Minnesota Synod as one of our colleagues and emerging leaders. So, well, thank you, Jeanette. And the focus of this workshop is really on encouraging others who might be feeling a tug towards some kind of leadership in the church, and maybe even those who haven't even discerned those gifts yet, to look at some folks and say, we think that person might be a good pastor or a good deacon, that kind of thing. So I'm wondering, Jeanette, how were you encouraged as you started coming into the discernment process? How were you encouraged to think about rostered service?
Yeah, so I guess there's a few different avenues that I've been reflecting on. One was that our church offered leadership opportunities for different ages of kids. So when I was in Sunday school, we had middle schoolers leading songs and skits on Sunday mornings. And so when I was kindergarten through fifth grade, I'd watch these old cool middle schoolers and I'd say, I'm going to be one of them someday. And sure enough, I was. And then when I was in middle school, I looked up to the youth group, and we had a TIM team, which is Teens in Ministry. So the high schoolers, and I said, I'm going to be one of them one day. And then I was. I went to Bible camp as a youth, and I was like, I'm going to be a camp counselor someday. They're so cool. I love what they get to do and share God's love in so many fun ways. And then in college, sure enough, I was. So that was one thing, was these leadership opportunities that my church in North St. Paul, Minnesota offered me to be able to participate in and to have role models to look up to. And again, when I got to that age, I was like, we're actually not that cool, but those kids, those youth look up to these role models in the church. So our church had a great structure of empowering young people to then empower young people, you could say. So that was kind of a generic framework of what I grew up in. There was another instance that was cut me direct, I guess, to the heart. It was like the first instance I felt like, oh, this could be a future for me. or first it was named to me. Like I said, I grew up in the church. I was confirmed when I was a freshman in high school. And I was one of 3 of the confirmation students who gave like a 5-minute message. So I had my line paper written out in pencil. It's saved in a box of mine somewhere, and talked about trust and faith in God, all those things that a 15-year-old knows or doesn't know. And after the service, I was standing out in the courtyard area, and one of the college mentors came up to me, and he's actually a pastor now in the ELCA, but at the time he wasn't. And he came up to me and he said, "You should be a pastor someday." And I laughed, and my mom was standing next to me like, what? What was just told to my daughter? And I laughed, and I was like, okay, yeah, thanks. But 11 years after that, I was writing my candidacy essay, and that is the first moment someone named, my gifts to me. Someone named that this could be where God is calling you to go. And I wrote back to that college student, that pastor now, Pastor Nate, and I said, I just want to let you know, like, you had an impact on my story, on where God is leading me. And he said, I don't just say that to anyone. I saw something in you, in that 5-minute handwritten message. So I think there's so much importance where if you see a gift in someone, or if you feel like this could be part of someone's future, is to name it, and not just to think it or to say it to someone else. Because if he hadn't said that to me, I don't know. I don't know what, maybe another moment I'd be reflecting on, but at age 15, someone named that, and here I am today in seminary.
So that one sentence, you should be a pastor,
right,
was huge and left an impression, and you remembered it all those years later. Yeah. And so, I think of another instance too, where now I'm a senior in college. So we fast forward, and I had put, seminary was not my goal at that time. It was in the back of my mind. But I needed to go and get a career that was, that society, you could say, deems as the way to go. And so a senior in college, I'm full of confusion of where I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to do. And I was sitting at a dinner at Concordia, and the speaker, I think he worked for the New York Times. He was an editor, but also a theologian. I don't even remember his name. If I looked it up and did some research, I could find it. But I had the campus pastor at the time, Pastor Ellie McCann, sitting on my right. And then on my left was my faith and leadership professor, who was Dr. Adam Copeland. So they're flanking me. And the speaker at the dinner says lots and lots and lots of things. But the sentence that stuck out to me was, if you're even thinking of going to seminary, you need to go. And I, kind of shrunk back. And those two, their heads turned towards me, because they knew that was part of my journey and where I was at. Love it.
That sentence stuck out to me too. And so I tell people who are thinking like, seminary's in my mind. And I say, this is my experience that I had, that someone said to me, even if you're thinking of seminary, you need to go. And I stand by that still. Like, there's no harm in going to seminary and getting, learning where God is continuing to call you, whether it's rostered ministry or you go and you learn more about yourself and about God, and then you're taken somewhere completely different.
Yeah. Thank you, Jeanette. We, as you well know, we talk about the internal call and the external call. And it sounds like you were experiencing both of those. You were feeling both of those.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
yes.
Absolutely. And I'm someone who, if you prescribe to the love languages, my top love language is words of affirmation. And so to know that internal call, was there in the back of my mind, just kind of sitting and waiting, and then to have that external call kind of awaken it and say like, yes, help pull those gifts out so they matched up together, the internal and external. And that is, I think, what propelled me to finally admit that seminary was the next step in my journey.
Right. Well, Jeanette, it's kind of what what I might expect to hear from somebody like you, that at some point there were different people, significant people in your life who continue to sort of plant that seed about seminary, about becoming a pastor, and you heard it. You heard the words, and they made an impact. And even a glance from two people sitting on your left and your right to even glance at you. Sometimes it wasn't the words; it was just the glance of others saying, "Hey, this is you." Um, and really, that's what we're talking about in this workshop is, encouraging others as we see gifts in others and recognizing them and saying, "Hey, have you ever considered this? We think you've got some gifts and talents to serve the church." And we're talking about rostered leadership right now, but we well know that we need tremendously gifted lay leaders also, and that encouragement is important too. But Jeanette, it's fun to hear a bit of your sort of your call story and how you were encouraged along the way. And it's fun now. I'm sure that the people who were important in your life, who were part of this, are just sitting back, delighted to see where you're at in the journey.
Yeah, I remember I gave a message last Christmas, right after Christmas, back at my home church. And people who watched me grow up in the church, I was from a baby and baptized, they were there listening to me now years and years later. And it was emotional for me to say, I'm here and I'm standing and giving this message. And I also ran the hallways as a youth, and I did productions in the church. I spent the night at lock-ins. I was up front here leading in different ways. And so to be able to have that connection with people and know that those people invested in my faith, like they were part of it, even though, I named a few people, but everyone who was there encouraging, whether they spoke it or were there as youth leaders or chaperones, like they were part of fostering the environment, and God moving through them to encourage me and many others into this journey of call.
Right. Yeah. Thanks for pointing that out. I always think, we remember certain people and what they've said, but it's the whole church that provides the environment and the setting to nurture and nourish our faith. So well said. Jeanette, thanks so much for today. Blessings to you. Your puppy is telling us it's time to close. There. That was perfect timing to bring us to a close. All right.
Okay. Thanks, everyone.
You take care.
Bye.
God's blessings. Bye-bye. Well, many thanks to Jeanette and to Devlin for sharing part of their stories with us today. It's great that we have the opportunity to hear from folks who are actually in the candidacy process, how they were encouraged along the way to consider this call. I want to say a word of thanks to all of you who have participated in this workshop, those who have watched this video. I also want to share with you at this time just a couple of good resources that are available as you encourage others to think about rostered leadership. On the ELCA website, there's a couple of good resources. If you go to Candidacy under the ELCA website, one of the tabs is Candidacy. If you click on that Candidacy tab, you'll find two resources. One is called Called to Lead, and the other is a summary of candidacy. Both are really good resources for those who are considering rostered leadership. Take a look at those and encourage others to do so as well. Thanks again, folks, for tuning in to our workshop today. Many thanks for what you do as leaders in the church, rostered or lay leaders. We appreciate the gifts that you bring to ministry and the way you encourage those gifts in others as well. So thanks for tuning in today. God's blessings on the rest of this assembly, and may we continue to recognize in others their potential for leadership in the church, and may God continue our efforts as we encourage others to think about different ways they can use those gifts and talents in service to others. Thank you.